Hey guys, welcome to this week's podcast episode. And I've got a fantastic guest for you today, Dr. Jim Salvucci. Goes by Jim, and coming out of the East Coast area, English professor. Today's talk is going to be all about communication and leadership and how you can apply those to authorship, thought leadership, leading, managing. It's got a really lot of interesting ideas. So, Jim, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris. Great to be here.
I know I always love to start by you talking about what you do, how you got there, just, briefly, how the audience can benefit from your expertise.
Yeah, so I spent 30 years in higher ed. I'm a recovering academic. I was an English professor, and then I became a dean, and then I was a provost at a couple different institutions. So I was working at a school outside of Baltimore called Stevenson University. I was a faculty leader. I've been in leadership positions my whole life. And then one day they asked me to become the dean of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences, which was a very cool thing, but there was no School of Humanities and Social Sciences. So I had to found the school. And I realized that although like I said, I've been a leader all my life, I need to really amp up my leadership game in order to get this school up and running and keep it running. And I looked at my bosses, right? I looked to the provost of the school, I looked to the president, and they were just bosses. And I make a distinction between bosses and leaders. They really weren't any help. They weren't mentoring me. They weren't guiding me in any way. They weren't offering me models. I looked at my peers. They were struggling. They were flailing about just like I was. I imitated them for a while. That was a disaster. So I decided, okay, I need to figure this out on my own. So I started reading about leadership, going to trainings, getting certification, applying what I learned, learning from my mistakes, learning from other people's mistakes, what I call learning from the negative paradigm. And like I said, eventually I moved on from there to a couple other schools where I was the provost, number two to the president, and left higher ed in 2020 and decided to really dig into what I truly love, which is helping young people become great leaders. So that's what I do now.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that. So ultimately, by talking to a lot of individuals such as yourself, it all boils down to communication. And, this can be for anything. If you want to be a thought leader, it's effective communication. So talk about the elements. You have three of them that help you communicate effectively.
I break communication down into three basic parts that you really need to master. In no particular order. The first one is the message. You need to have a message, and that message needs to have value. And the way it gets value is through you having values, connecting with your character, right? So if you are a person of values, your message will have values. And I always use the example of the boy who cried wolf. Everyone knows the story. Boy's supposed to be watching the sheep, screams wolf when there's no wolf there just for fun, gets the town people all riled up. They don't appreciate that. Does it again the next day. They don't appreciate it. Third day rolls around. There's really a wolf. He screams wolf. Nobody shows up. Why? Because they realize he's not a person of substance. He's not a person they can trust. He doesn't have values. His message is therefore worthless. And it's a disaster, right? So that's a really great example of, your message needing some sort of value to people. The second thing is the people themselves, the audience. The audience needs to be somewhat known by you. You can't always know who your audience is. We're on a podcast here. I don't know exactly who the audience is, but I would assume, pretty informed assumption that there are people who are interested in the topic we're talking about. So I believe that there's an audience out there who understands what I'm saying and is receptive to what I'm saying. And those are the key elements of audience. You want to know who they are to some extent, as best you can, and they should be somewhat receptive to your message. And again, that message has to have value. The third element is the most critical of all. It's the one that trumps everything, and it's clarity. Clarity trumps everything. If you are not clear, it is perfectly irrelevant. If you have a wonderful message, it is perfectly irrelevant if the audience is there and is dying to hear what you have to say. If you aren't making yourself clear, you might as well not be speaking. And unfortunately, I use the example of my wife for this because she was notorious for sending text messages out to people without really looking at what she was doing. We were in Baltimore, we were involved in our community quite a bit. And she would send out mass text messages, 10, 15 people. She'd type them out. She was an attorney, so she'd do it real quick. She's real busy, too busy to proofread it. And I would look at the thing and say, look, I'm sorry, I'm married to you and I have no idea what you meant here. This isn't clear. And I know she had a valuable message. People wanted to hear it, but nobody understood it. So one of the things about clarity is people think that, that they shouldn't spend a lot of time, looking at an email or a message or sending a text message, anything, any direct message, because they're too busy. But look how much time is wasted when someone sends you an unclear message. You don't know what they're saying. You have to follow up. You have to clarify it back and forth, right? And if somebody just took 2 seconds to look at it, make sure it made sense to people, all those problems he solved. If you're a leader and you're sending unclear messages, this is an untold disaster for your people because every message is a crisis. And I've been in that situation with bosses who were sending unclear message. It's horrible. So those are the 3 elements of communication. I can go into more depth about any of them if you want, or we can keep talking about communication, other aspects.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've, just in terms of, and what I've noticed is the very best companies, the leader has someone else doing what you're talking about because so that they can free up there to talk, focus on vision and strategy. And then they have someone like a COO carry out these things that kind of and that way it doesn't bog them down. So what is you talk about 4 C's of leadership. What is that?
Yeah. So these are 4 elements and they are in a particular order that happen to be with the letter C. A lot of leadership advice is, very expansive. The 21 rules of this and 32 laws of that, whatever. The problem is the human brain can't comprehend this stuff. And it's all good. I mean, what's being said is fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But what are you supposed to do with 19 things? You can't possibly really work with that. The human brain can handle pretty much about 4 maximum. And it doesn't matter how simple or complex they are. There's a study out of the University of Oregon that talks about how those 4 things can be incredibly complex as long as there's only 4, or they can be incredibly simple. It doesn't matter. So it's just the number 4 somehow magic to our brains. So what I do is I have these 4 elements that really all leaders must embody and must practice. The first one's character, which I already talked a little bit about. And that's your values. That's part of it, your personality, the things that are important to you, but also, and your experiences, but also, and perhaps most importantly, your behavior. Your behavior reflects your character. There's no such thing as, oh, well, he's a good person inside. If he's acting like a jerk, he's not a good person. I don't care whether he's a good person inside or not. It's irrelevant. The person's character is not sound. So your behavior reflects your character, reflects who you really are. Another element is communication, and that builds off of character. And we just talked about that. Again, that message that has to have value, that value is driven by your character. So your character is what actually creates the message that people are going to hear. That's communication. Finally, or not finally, but next is compromise. And compromise requires both communication and character in order to enact it. And what's really interesting about compromise is it's very transactional. It's a give and take, right? There's no such thing as, somebody compromised 100%. That's not a compromise. That's a giveaway. Somebody's always giving and someone's always taking on both sides, or as many sides as there are. And the percentage doesn't matter. It's not necessarily halfway. It's not necessarily 50-50. It could be 99 and 100 and 1, whatever. But the point is both people are giving and both people are taking, or all the people are giving and all the people are taking. Compromise is important because it helps establish relationships, which is the whole point of the communication. Once you can compromise, once you have that transaction, then you can move on to the 4th C, which is the most important, and that is collaboration. That's what leaders are really about. They're about getting people to work together as a team towards some end, some project. They want to complete something. They want to do something. They want to achieve something. And that's a matter of collaboration. Collaboration is not transactional. Collaboration is all about win-win. And it's the opposite of competition. which is ultimately zero-sum game. Somebody wins and everybody else loses, the way competition works. A lot of people think, oh, if I pit my workers against each other, they'll compete and that'll motivate them. No, ultimately, you're just going to ruin a lot of really good people. The idea of leadership is to get them to work together and get them to work on the same things with each other. And that is ultimately the goal. You can't get to collaboration without first compromising. And you can't get there without communication, and you can't get there without character. So you see how all these things sort of blend one in the other to lead toward that collaboration.
Yeah, I love that. There's this, saying, because, leaders are really important. It's an important skill, but the landscape is changing, because before it was just like you were in a corporate or a small business setting, but now you lead a family, you lead a relationship, a lot of different applicable scenarios. So then talking about this lifelong learning, and I love this idea because you are you've got an extensive library in the background, and why everybody says that every great leader must be a lifelong learner. So how can leaders foster a culture of continuous learning in their organizations?
Oh, there's a bunch of ways. First, let me talk a little bit about why it's so important. One of the things that we often overlook is that there's no real distinction between teachers and leaders. I was a teacher and I was a leader. And so I discovered that every leadership challenge was actually a teaching challenge in disguise, using the same skills, the same attitudes, the same mindsets that I would use in the classroom. I use those to lead. And so the connection's so tight there. There's no good teacher who isn't also a learner, right? If you stop learning and you try to teach, you're not a very effective teacher. And so learning is key to teaching. Teaching is exactly the same as leading. Hence, you need to keep learning to be a leader. Leader's about self-improvement. Now, how do you get that into your team? Part of one is by example, right? They see you learning and continue to learn. You talk about it. You're open about it. To be vulnerable about it. I preach something what I call it radical vulnerability, right? So the idea that you put yourself out there, a radical transparency, that you put yourself out there and tell people what you're working on, what you're thinking about, what you're struggling with, so that they understand you better and trust you better and trust you more. That is, part of the learning process is making yourself vulnerable. You expose people to that, they will see that you value it. They will begin to value it because people look to their leaders for models. Another thing is to be very direct. Give them trainings, give them the learning, right? Provide it to them in a variety of ways, or send them places to get the learning. And I don't mean just send them off somewhere and they did some DEI training and now everything's good. It doesn't work that way. Make sure it's good. Make sure that you're sending them to places where they're actually bringing stuff back, and check in with them. What did you learn? How are you applying it? How's it work? Let's talk about it. And then the most important of all is what I do, which is mentor people, work with people, help them become the kind of leader you are, because that's part of leadership too. It's actually one of the residual effects. Every leader should be very, very concerned about their legacy, not from an egotistical point of view, but from the point of view that leaders beget leaders. So if you are a good leader, you will be creating other good leaders. And the beauty of that is they will become good leaders and they will beget more leaders. And that's how we change the world. So, there's a lot going on here. There's a lot to say about lifelong learning, but those are the real basics. Making sure that it happens among your people, be very, very open about it and very explicit and very proactive and intentional.
Yeah, so beautifully said. What are there was the other question is this idea of workplace bullying, and how can leaders identify and address it within their organizations? There's actually an interesting, because I was reading, because just with the elections and everything, and it's just people promoting the same people. And so basically there's this, I think, I can't remember what the law is, but it's basically people promoting the same people over and over. So an organization, as per the book, it says people in the organization get dumber and dumber. So how can leaders identify and address this?
Yeah, a good leader would never do that. It's just part of what a good leader is, right? They would never just promote people for the sake of promoting them, or endorse them, or give or empower them just for the sake of empowering them. A good leader is very democratic. They want to work with their people and have their people involved. In terms of things like bullying, first off, if you're a bully, you are not a leader, flat out. Okay. You're just a boss. And moreover, if you're a bully, you are incompetent. Because guess what? There's nothing in your job description that says that you should be bullying people. And if you are in charge of other people, your main task, your number one imperative is to make them better at their jobs. And if you're bullying them, guess what? They are not. They are not better at their jobs, right? So therefore, you failed the number one imperative of your position. You are incompetent. So that, just lay that out there. And I have a little saying too, just as a check-in. There's a special place in hell for leaders who yell. Okay. So if you're a boss and you're yelling at people, you're getting angry, you're showing them anger, there's something wrong here. I mean, yeah, if the building's on fire, everyone get out, yell, yes, please. But if you're actually yelling at people in anger, you're not being an effective leader at all. You're just being a boss again. So bullying is something that really is insidious. It happens all the time. I've been the victim of it myself. And when your bully is your boss, it's impossible to resist. It's like, when your teacher is a bully, that is, impossible to resist. Or, when a cop on the street is a bully, they have complete authority. There's nothing you can do. You're helpless. But if it's a peer, then there's things you can do. There's ways you can fight it. But it's really imperative that leaders make sure it's not happening. And if they get an inkling of it, they snuff it out right away and make sure that whoever's acting in that way is, sort of shut down so they can't do that anymore. It really can take a lot of different forms. And so, it's very situational how you deal with it, and, depending on what the relationships are and all. But one thing you can do is you can empower the person who's being bullied as well. And part of that empowerment is come to me when there's a problem. I'm not going to, be a jerk about it. I'm not going to put you in an awkward position, but if I don't know, I can't do anything about it. And that's a form of empowerment that can really go a long way. And I've done that with people, and it's worked out very well. But the other thing is, sometimes you just put the bully on notice that the other person now has the power to come to you. And believe me, they shape up real quick.
Yeah. I know there's a lot of people interested in talking with you. So how can they follow your social media, follow your work, find out more about you?
Yeah, the easiest thing to do is go to my website. My company is Guidance for Greatness. So go to Guidance for Greatness. Another place to find me is on Substack. I have a podcast and blog. So every week I write an essay and then I record it. Some people like to read it. Some people like to listen to it. And that is at jimsalvucci.substack.com. My last name is Salvucci. So jimsalvucci.substack.com. And I also have a free resource that's available, and you can download it from my website, or you can go directly to the landing page, which is thegreatleadershiptoolkit.com, all one word, thegreatleadershiptoolkit.com. And any of those will get you to me, and you'll see my ideas. And I'd love to hear from people. I love hearing people's comments and questions.
Yeah, I love that. And for all the audience, I direct you to Jim's socials. Give him a like and follow. And thanks so much for coming onto this podcast.